This series of lessons guides you through a process to investigate and evaluate historic buildings. We assume that you, the listener, have experience in conducting fieldwork and historical research. We aim to help build your skills and confidence. We emphasize the importance of gathering evidence and building an argument. We offer advice and encourage you to navigate through challenging or unfamiliar projects. You will still need other reference materials, such as dictionaries of architectural terms and guidelines from the National Register of Historic Places. However, this series of lessons will help you apply those concepts and techniques in your work on the national forests. This series is produced by HistoriCorps, a nonprofit preservation organization in partnership with the U.S. Forest Service Intermountain Region Regional Heritage Program. To begin, let's paraphrase a passage from The Archaeology of Buildings by the British archaeologist Richard K. Morris. He writes that to understand any property in terms of its history and phases of development, we need to understand the changes to its fabric, form, and function over time. Form means the defining physical elements such as building types, construction methods, and designs that show the intention or purpose of a property. These elements are often tied to a larger context. Fabric means smaller physical details such as materials, conditions, and textures that show the effect of time and use. These details are often unique to that property and the people who occupy it. Function means the way the property is used, both by design and in practice. In a new building, the fabric, form, and function will have a simple interrelated logic. It is easy to understand a new building. As time progresses, these elements change and their relationships become more complex. People typically adapt the forms and functions of their buildings to cope with change. In the process, traces of the past are fossilized within the fabric, or physical details that persist. In an old building, fabric, forms, and functions may tell a complex story with many connections to the wider world beyond that property. As heritage professionals, we investigate fabric, form, and function in order to record and articulate stories that are significant. As we know, historic resources are not merely significant because they are old. Historic resources provide an authentic physical connection to the past. Most determinations of eligibility or evaluations are imperfect because it can be difficult to answer every significant question about an old property and its history. When you analyze an old property, your information is always limited by the sources that are available and the time that you can spend to seek out new sources. Keep in mind that the evaluation can be imperfect and yet also effective. The evaluation is a process, an argument, and a tower of evidence. It can be imperfect and yet still stand. In this series of lessons, we will look at the key steps or layers that really matter in your analysis. We encourage you to focus on those layers and move forward even when you might be missing some information. Here's a word of advice from the architectural historian Liz Carter. Carter is an instructor in the field of historic preservation. Regarding the process to evaluate historic properties, she writes, "There is no fill in the blanks or multiple choice formula here. This type of work requires patience, tenacity, creativity, and critical thought. Your success is based on your ability to present information in a clear, logical, convincing fashion using excellent writing, critical thinking, and analytical skills within the National Register framework. The essential qualities are clarity, organization, and consistency between the physical and historical records." You could approach each evaluation project as if you are building a Jenga tower. In each evaluation, we start with a description of the property. From there, we build an analysis to determine if the property is historic, not just old. Your research in the office and in the field provide additional pieces of evidence that strengthen your analysis. It's fine to leave a few gaps in each level of the analysis, but if the property is indeed historic, you should be able to build enough strength in each level to support the levels above. If the property is not historic, you should be able to explain which layers fail and why. The property's physical material forms the bedrock of determining National Register eligibility. We begin by describing the property in a precise and technical manner. Then we add the next layer, which is the historic context. Historic contexts provide an account of the property's specific history and the history of the world around it. Then we move on to the next layer, which is significance. Significance describes the way in which the property's history relates to more broad historical themes. The next essential layer is a discussion of the property's physical integrity. Integrity ties the significance back to the physical description, or foundation, to describe how the property provides a physical connection to significant stories from the past. If these four pieces support each other, the property is historically significant and eligible for the National Register of Historic Places. If the pieces do not align, the property is not historically significant. For example, a building may be physically intact, but if its unique story is not associated with broader historical themes, then the building is not historically significant. It's not eligible for the National Register. Likewise, a building may be associated with significant historical themes, but if the physical material does not reflect those themes, then the building lacks integrity. It is not eligible for the National Register. Throughout this series, we will look at each layer and emphasize the important elements that you need to address before moving on to the next layer. The image of the Jenga tower is useful because it reflects the way we build an argument and determine if any given property is historic. Each layer rests on the layer below. Our information about the property may be imperfect, yet sufficient. The image of a Jenga tower also illustrates how and why we protect historic properties from future changes that may undermine or collapse their historic value. On the National Forest, we often evaluate properties through the Section 106 process in anticipation of changes that are already proposed. When a property is historic, future changes have the potential to strengthen or weaken the property's integrity. Some changes are adverse. They alter a significant aspect of form, fabric, or function and dissolve an essential connection between the property and its history. Some changes are neutral. They alter an insignificant aspect of form, fabric, or function. The essential connections stay the same. Some changes are beneficial. They restore significant aspects of form, fabric, or function. The essential connections between the property and its history become stronger and more evident. In the last lesson of this series, we will emphasize how you can assess effects based on those layers: the physical description, historical context, historical significance, and physical integrity. You can help preserve and protect historic properties by strengthening your skills to assess effects.